The busy city street bustled with life cars honking impatiently, people rushing to their destinations, their footsteps echoing against the pavement. In the middle of it all, a small figure stood at the crosswalk, waiting for the signal to change. Lily, a 7-year-old girl with a backpack far too big for her tiny frame, stood on the corner, her big eyes scanning the crowd. She was tired from a long day of school, but her heart was full, as it always was. Her gaze fell on an elderly man standing nearby, struggling with his cane, clearly unsure of how to cross the busy street. People brushed past him, too absorbed in their own lives to even notice his struggle. Lily hesitated for a moment, unsure if it was the right thing to do. But as she watched the man look around nervously, something inside her stirred. Without a second thought, she stepped forward, her small hand reaching up to offer him help. "Don't worry, sir, I'll help you," Lily said, with a warm smile, her voice full of kindness. Mr. Thompson, the elderly man, looked down at her in surprise, his eyes softening as he gazed at her innocent face. For a brief moment, he hesitated, then, with a gentle nod, placed his hand in hers. Together they crossed the street, the noise of the cars and the rush of the crowd fading into the background. Mr. Thompson gripped her hand tightly, but there was something comforting about it. "You remind me of someone," Mr. Thompson said softly, his voice distant, as if recalling a memory from long ago. When they finally reached the other side, he paused, looking down at Lily with appreciation. He patted her head gently, a smile tugging at his lips. "You have a kind heart, young lady," Mr. Thompson said, his voice filled with gratitude. Lily smiled up at him, her heart warm from the simple act of kindness. She waved goodbye and continued on her way home, never imagining how that one small gesture would change her life forever. Lily's small feet pounded the pavement as she made her way home from school. The city streets felt both familiar and intimidating, the noise of honking cars and shouting pedestrians a constant backdrop to her thoughts. The walk home was always quiet, her mind full of the simple joys of a 7-year-old's world, even as she passed by the towering buildings and the hurried crowds of strangers. When she reached her destination, Lily sighed. Their home, more of a rundown apartment than a house, stood at the end of a narrow street, far from the bustling core of the city. The exterior was chipped and faded, the bricks cracked from years of neglect. It was small, cramped, and dark, but it was home. Lily opened the door and stepped inside, the air inside damp and cool. It was the smell of a home that had been lived in for years, of dust, old furniture, and the faint scent of cooking that never quite reached the level of warmth they needed. Her mother, Sarah, sat at the kitchen table, her face tired and worn. She was just back from her long shift at the diner, her apron still on, her shoulders slumped from exhaustion. "Did you eat, sweetie?" Sarah asked, her voice weak but full of care. She smiled, but it was a tired smile, the kind that came from years of trying to stay strong despite everything. Lily forced a smile in return, her stomach growling in protest, but she didn't want her mother to worry. "Yeah, Mommy," she lied, though her words were soft, almost unconvincing. Her stomach growled louder in response, but she ignored it, looking away quickly. She didn't want to make her mother feel any more burdened than she already did. Sarah's smile faded just a little, but she didn't say anything. She just sat there for a moment, staring at the bills spread out on the table in front of her, unpaid, as always. There were no other options, no way out. They had more bills than money, and with each passing day, the pile of overdue notices seemed to grow higher. It felt like a constant cycle, one that never seemed to break. Lily moved into the kitchen to make herself a simple meal, a bowl of rice, the only thing she could prepare on her own. She made sure to eat it slowly, savoring each bite, even though it wasn't enough. Later that night, after they had cleaned up and Sarah had fallen asleep on the couch, Lily knelt by the side of her bed. her little hands clasped together, and she whispered a prayer into the quiet of the room. "I just want Mommy to be happy," she whispered softly, her voice barely audible. "I wish we didn't have to worry so much." Her eyes fluttered shut, and she rested her head against the bed frame, the prayer lingering in the air, even as the weight of hunger gnawed at her. She had been praying like this for a long time, asking for something she couldn't name, something that would make life easier for them, for Sarah, for herself, and for everything that seemed out of reach. But she knew deep down that their troubles weren't over. There were more bills waiting for them, more nights where there wouldn't be enough food to go around, more times where Sarah would come home exhausted, only to fall asleep without a moment of rest. Lily squeezed her eyes shut tighter, wishing that tomorrow could be different. She didn't want her mother to keep working until she couldn't stay awake anymore. She didn't want to see her mother's tired eyes, the strain etched into her face after each shift. "Please, God," Lily whispered, "just help us. Please let Mommy smile again." And with that silent prayer, she fell asleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of challenges, but hoping, somehow, that things would change. The next day, just like every other, Lily got up early to start another round of school, but as she left for school, she held on to the memory of Mr. Thompson's kind eyes, the way he had looked down at her and called her kind-hearted. She held on to the hope that small acts of kindness could lead to something bigger, that maybe, just maybe, life could change. The following afternoon, as the warm afternoon sun filtered through the dusty curtains of their apartment, there came a soft knock at the door. Sarah was seated at the kitchen table, sorting through another stack of bills that had arrived that morning, the weight of their unpaid debts hanging over her like a dark cloud. Lily, sitting on the couch nearby, was absorbed in her homework, though the ache of hunger still gnawed at her stomach. They had become used to these quiet afternoons, filled with the endless cycle of work, worry, and exhaustion. When the knock echoed through the stillness, it startled Sarah. She stood, brushing off the worn apron she had been wearing all day, her body stiff from the long hours. She hesitated for a moment, wondering who would be knocking at this hour. The landlord? Another bill collector? She wasn't sure she was ready for either. She walked cautiously to the door and opened it, only to be met by the sharp, well-groomed figure of a man in a dark suit, holding a briefcase in his hand. His polished shoes clicked against the floor as he stood, seemingly out of place in the quiet, humble entryway. "Are you Sarah Williams?" the man asked, his voice smooth and professional. Sarah froze for a moment, the name sounding unfamiliar but vaguely reassuring. "Yes." "Why?" she asked cautiously. The man nodded and extended the briefcase towards her. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. William Thompson," he said, the name sending a jolt through her chest. Lily, who had been watching quietly from the living room, stood up and slowly approached the door. She glanced at her mother, confusion evident in her eyes. Mr. Thompson? The man she had helped cross the street? What could he possibly have to do with them? Sarah, still unsure, took the briefcase from the lawyer's hands. He looked down at Lily and smiled, though it seemed distant, almost as if he knew something they didn't. "This letter is for you, Ms. Williams," the lawyer said, his voice filled with formality. He handed Sarah an envelope, sealed with an official wax stamp. "It's about your daughter, Lily, and Mr. William Thompson." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and she exchanged a look with Lily, both of them more confused than ever. "Mr. Thompson?" Sarah asked, now more curious than ever. "What's this all about?" Without another word, the lawyer stepped back slightly, giving Sarah space to read the letter. Her fingers trembled as she carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the parchment inside. The words, written in neat, elegant handwriting, sent a chill down her spine. She started reading aloud, her voice shaky as she read the first line. "To Lily, The little girl who reminded me that kindness still exists. She paused, looking up at Lily, whose eyes widened with surprise. This was about her. The kindness Lily had shown Mr. Thompson had clearly left an impact on him, though they still didn't understand why he was leaving them anything. Sarah continued, her voice trembling with emotion. You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything in return. But you helped me anyway. Lily took a step closer, her heart racing. She remembered that day, the old man with the cane, the way she had offered him her hand without thinking. But now, the realization hit her. Her simple act of kindness was about to lead to something much bigger than she ever could have imagined. And for that, I leave you my most valuable treasure. The words hung in the air like a promise, and Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she lowered the letter, struggling to comprehend what she had just read. What is this? Sarah whispered. The lawyer stood silently, waiting, as Sarah looked back at the lawyer, her voice barely audible. Is this real? What does it mean? The lawyer's expression softened. Mr. Thompson has left a portion of his estate to Lily. He never had any children of his own, but he felt that Lily's kindness was something extraordinary. His will includes a significant amount of money and other valuable assets. He wanted her to have it as a way of rewarding her selflessness. Lily's mouth dropped open, completely stunned by what she was hearing. Her hands instinctively went to her stomach, where the gnawing hunger she'd been hiding from her mother seemed to vanish in that instant. Are you telling me that we're going to be okay? Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. The lawyer nodded, though he remained quiet. His job was to deliver the news, not to explain the full scope of the impact. But Sarah could see in his eyes that this was no simple gift. It was a life-changing moment, one that would alter the course of their future forever. The lawyer pulled a few additional papers from his briefcase and handed them to Sarah. There will be more to go through, of course, he said. Legal documents, inheritance details, but Mr. Thompson made sure that his wishes were clear. This is for Lily. As the lawyer turned to leave, Sarah stood frozen in place, the letter still in her hands, her mind reeling. She looked down at Lily, her eyes brimming with tears. I don't understand, Sarah whispered. How did this happen? Lily shook her head, as confused as her mother. I just helped him cross the street. He didn't need to do this for me. But as Sarah pulled her into a tight hug, she felt a sense of peace settle in. Lily had done something good, something pure, and that good had come back to them in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. The mystery of Mr. Thompson's fortune was just beginning, and Sarah knew their lives were about to change in a way they could never have dreamed. As the lawyer left and Sarah closed the door, she held Lily close, knowing that kindness truly had a way of coming back around. And they would never forget the day an act of compassion changed their entire world. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the letter, her eyes scanning the words over and over. She had barely comprehended the first part, but as she read further, the enormity of the situation slowly began to sink in. He left her. His entire estate. She whispered in disbelief, her voice shaking. The letter was still in her hands, but it was almost as if the words were too much for her to fully understand. The lawyer, who had been quietly standing by, nodded solemnly. Yes, Mr. Thompson was a billionaire. He had no family left. Until he met your daughter. Sarah's breath hitched, and her hands instinctively went to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. This can't be real, she whispered again, her voice trailing off. Lily, still standing beside her mother, looked up at the lawyer with confusion and curiosity. The world had suddenly shifted beneath their feet, and she could barely wrap her head around the words that were unfolding before her. But the lawyer's next actions made the shock even more overwhelming. He reached into his briefcase and carefully pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. It was delicate, and its simplicity only made it seem even more significant. He handed the box to Lily, his eyes filled with quiet respect. "Miss Williams," the lawyer said, his voice soft yet filled with the weight of the moment. "This is for you. It was part of Mr. Thompson's will." Lily took the box, her hands shaking slightly as she opened it. Inside was a small, golden locket. It was beautiful, simple, yet elegant. The gold gleamed in the dim light of their apartment, the locket resting in the velvet with a weight that felt like it held more than just metal. Lily carefully lifted the locket out, her fingers tracing its smooth surface. She opened it slowly, revealing the photograph inside, a black and white picture of a young girl, smiling, her eyes full of life and warmth. She looked around Lily's age, perhaps a little older. Lily's heart skipped a beat, and she stared at the photograph, feeling a strange connection to the girl, though she didn't know why. She turned to the lawyer, confusion clouding her young face. "Who is she?" The lawyer's expression softened as he spoke, his voice now tinged with a deep sadness. "That is Mr. Thompson's daughter. Her name was Emily. She passed away many years ago." Lily's eyes widened as she looked at the picture again, the girl's smiling face now etched in her mind. "But why is this mine?" she asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. The lawyer took a deep breath before answering. Mr. Thompson never had a family left after his daughter's passing. He lived alone for many years, unable to find the joy he had known before. But when he met you, Lily, when you helped him cross that street, he saw something in you. You reminded him of Emily, the kindness you showed him, the warmth he had lost with his daughter's passing, all of that returned when he met you. You unknowingly gave him back what he had lost, Lily. You reminded him of the love he had once felt for his own daughter." Lily looked at the locket again, her young face full of empathy. She had no idea that her small act of kindness would have such a profound impact. But now, in her hands, was a gift that was more than just wealth. It was a piece of someone's heart, a memory of a lost love that had found its way back through her. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she absorbed the words. She looked at Lily, her eyes brimming with tears. "You didn't just help him cross the street, sweetie. You gave him back a part of his heart. You gave him love." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she held the locket tightly in her small hands. She didn't fully understand everything about wealth or the estate that had been left to her. What she did understand, however, was that her simple gesture, something so small and innocent, had changed a man's life in ways she could never have imagined. The lawyer stood silently, his face kind, knowing that the moment had transformed the lives of this family in ways words couldn't fully explain. Sarah, still in awe of what had just unfolded, pulled Lily into a tight embrace, her voice breaking as she whispered, "You've given us a future, Lily. You've done something incredible." Lily, holding the locket close to her heart, smiled up at her mother, her eyes full of understanding. She may have only been a little girl, but she now knew that kindness could change the world. And somehow, in the most unexpected of ways, it had changed hers. Weeks passed, and the world around Lily and her mother slowly transformed. The small apartment they had lived in for so long, with its cramped space and constant strain, was now a distant memory. They had moved into a beautiful house on a quiet street, with wide windows that let in the sunlight, a garden filled with blooming flowers, and a yard where Lily could run freely without worry. Sarah, now free from the burden of working 3 jobs just to make ends meet, finally had the chance to rest. The stress that had weighed on her shoulders for so many years slowly faded. She could sit down to a warm meal with Lily, no longer exhausted from sleepless nights, and no longer wondering how they would survive. The days were different now, easier, brighter. and all because of Lily's simple act of kindness. Lily's life had changed too. She now went to school without worrying about her mother's tired eyes or the empty cupboards at home. She had friends, she had opportunities, and she had the security of knowing that she and her mother were safe and cared for. But even with all the changes, Lily had never forgotten what had led them here. The kindness she had shown Mr. Thompson had turned into something much bigger than she could have ever imagined, a legacy that would carry her through the rest of her life. One afternoon, Lily stood at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. As the cars whizzed by, her eyes fell upon an elderly woman on the other side of the street. The woman was struggling with a cane, her steps unsteady as she tried to cross, her eyes searching for help in the midst of the busy street. Lily felt a familiar tug at her heart, a pull that had led her to help Mr. Thompson all those weeks ago. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, a gentle smile on her face, and walked toward the woman. "Let me help you," Lily said softly, offering her hand. The woman looked up at her, surprised but grateful, and took Lily's hand. As they crossed the street together, a warm breeze stirred the air, carrying with it a sense of peace and comfort. Lily could almost feel Mr. Thompson's presence, as if he were watching from somewhere far away, pleased to know that his gift had led to more kindness in the world. Lily smiled to herself, knowing that kindness was not just about what you received, it was about what you gave, and as long as she had the chance, she would continue to pass that kindness along, just like Mr. Thompson had once given it to her, and in that moment, Lily knew her journey was only beginning.